Okay, so sorry. I'm going to do this proof here. So this is one of your assignment proofs. Okay, so what do you guys want to do first?
Multiply it by 1, so 1 minus sine A over 1 minus sine. Oh wait, never mind, I didn't see that.
Can you on the bottom you can multiply times 1 minus sine A.
Over 1 minus sine A?
Yeah.
So that's just a form of 1, right? So just make sure everybody can see that. So I'm going to multiply it by a form of 1, but it's actually 1 minus sine A over 1 minus sine A on the left side. And so I'm left with what? I'm going to FOIL this out. So 1 minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A over 1 minus sine squared A. And on the right side, I'm going to FOIL that out, I think, right? Sound good? FOIL it out?
Yeah.
I'm going to get secant squared A minus 2 secant A tangent A plus tangent squared A, okay? Now I did that because one of my formulas says 1 plus tangent squared is secant squared. So secant squared, this is actually what? 1 plus tangent squared A, right? So could I do that? Does that make sense? So then on the right side, this is going to be equal to 1 plus tangent squared A minus 2 secant A tangent A plus tangent squared A. Okay, so I can add the tangents together, and I'm going to be left with 1 plus 2 tangent squared A plus 2 secant A tangent A. You guys see what I might be able to do with that?
Can you divide the whole thing by 2?
Sure. So let me. So 1 plus 2 secant A tangent A plus 2 tangent A squared. Okay. So let me come back to that. What's on the left side? What can I do with that?
You can simplify 1 minus sine squared A to cosine squared A.
Okay. So I've got, and on top, well, I might leave this by 1 minus sine A quantity squared on top, right? And that's going to be over cosine squared A, okay? So, what else can we do?
If you FOIL out the top of the...
Get this, right?
Oh, did you just simplify it?
Yeah. Cosine. 1 over cosine squared is secant squared, right? So maybe oops, I already did that. So maybe if I left this instead of what I do, I turn secant A into tangent A. So what if I turn tangent into secant instead, right? Tangent squared A is secant squared minus 1. So what if so this is what I mean by kind of playing with it, right? So you just kind of play with it for a little bit. Let me go back a little bit. So on the right side, so what I see here on the left side is, this is 1 minus sine, you can FOIL this out if you want, but maybe I'll just leave it like this for a minute, right? And 1 over cosine squared A is actually what? Secant squared A, right? Okay. So if I have secant squared on the left, maybe I want to leave this as secant squared, right? 1 plus sine squared A. So if I want to take this tangent squared, I want to turn that into secant maybe? What is secant times tangent? 1 over cosine times sine over cosine. It looks like sine 2 times sine over cosine squared right there. Right? So sine times secant squared. So let's turn this into secant then, okay? So tangent squared is actually what? Secant squared minus 1. Okay. So I'm going to get secant squared A minus 2, and then secant times tangent is secant tangent, so that's actually sine over cosine squared, or secant squared A sine of A, right? And then tangent is, so plus secant squared A minus 1. Oh, so what do I have? What do I have here now?
Well, the secant squares cancel out.
So secant squared.
The first and last one cancel out. Because it's
Add them together. Right? I can add them together. So 2, but almost, right? So good. So they can add together minus 2 secant squared A sine of A. I still got that 1 though. I'm still minus 1. So what if I divided by secant squared A on it? So you see how some of these can be pretty complicated, right? What if I divided by secant squared A on both sides? I'd be left with 1 minus sine of A squared equals 2 minus 2 sine of A minus, is that cosine squared A? And on the left side, I'm going to have 1 minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A. Secant squared, 1 over secant squared A is actually cosine squared A. Cosine squared A could be 1 minus sine squared A, right? Cosine squared A is actually 1 minus sine squared A. That's actually 1 minus squared A. So I've got 2 minus 1 is 1, right? 2 minus 1 is 1. And then minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A. Which is what I have on the left, right? 1 minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A, 1 minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A. So I got it, right?
Something like this is going to be on the quiz.
This is on the take home. Okay? So what I did is on the left side, on the bottom, I got 1 minus sine squared, which is cosine squared, right? Do you guys see that? And 1 minus sine squared is actually cosine. 1 over cosine squared is actually secant squared, right? So I turn that into a secant squared on the left, and then I go on the right, and I say if I have secant squared on the left, I would like to get secant squared on the right, right? But I have tangent squared, so I'm going to get this into secant squared, okay? And so I did that. I simplified. I got secant squared on the left, secant squared on the right. This, I divided both sides by secant squared. So they got rid of that, got rid of that, got rid of that. Left me with sine minus 1 over secant squared, which is actually cosine squared, right? I was left with cosine squared, which is actually 1 minus sine squared, right? It's kind of complicated, guys, but I was left with this, and I go, oh, 1 minus 2 sine A plus sine squared A is actually 1 minus 2 sine A. Ah, I got it, right? That's what I was trying to do. Okay, so that's actually number, there you go, right there. So I think that was number 8 on the take-home quiz.